Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. It is July the 5th. How did we get here? I don't know. It's like a blur. It was March 16th or 17th the last time I checked. But it's because I haven't really left the house, have I? This is episode 15, week 15 of the COVID-19 series that I started after I took a bit of a break from podcasting. I did 100 episodes. And then I decided to stay home with my son while my wife went back to medical school. And then we got daycare, so I got to start a full-time job as an insolvency counselor. And throughout all that, there's no time for podcasting. Not the way that I used to do it anyway, with editing and planning and researching and things like that. Now it's just Sunday morning, let's record an episode, no editing. It's basically a live show. So I'm sorry about all the ums, because there's going to be lots of them. From myself, maybe not so much from my guest, because she's also a professional. Rubina Ahmed-Haq is here with me, my co-host. I'm the sidekick to her hosting the Dear Ruby podcast that we just recorded, like 5 minutes before this one. So welcome, Rubina.
Thanks for having me. These back-to-back podcasts are pretty exciting.
We're like real podcasters now.
We're just in the studio all the time, just creating content.
Yes, well, and Rubina is creating content literally all the time, and that's her job. Rubina's on TV, she's on the radio, she's writing stuff. What did I miss? What else are you working on?
I do a couple of things. I'm freelance. I'm a freelance journalist, so I obviously work in a few different places. I work for the CBC, radio and television. I work for Global News, which is owned by Chorus, again, radio and television. I write for a few websites, including Golden Girl Finance. I've started this new one with Canadian Prepaid Organization. I've started doing some writing for them for their blog about news that's out there about the prepayment systems that are available to Canadians. And then as things go, during COVID, I've been doing a lot of stuff with universities and colleges about how to plan your personal finances, how to make sure that you've got your money in check and that you're doing all the right things when it comes to the benefits that are offered to Canadians, that you're putting enough money away for a rainy day right now, because it sounds like it's going to be a pretty rainy few months. They're saying this pandemic could last 18 months
rainy
to 2
years.
Rainy years, yeah. So, I kind of do those. I do all things personal finance and a little bit of workplace as well in that capacity.
And Rubina was on episode 68 of the podcast where we told her financial origin story from the earliest money memory. I feel like it was Pizza, if that was the one, saving up money to buy the pizza with your friends in
and
school.
always having to ask a friend,
right?
could I borrow a quarter or something? Yeah.
All the way to coming back from Pakistan during 9/11 with thousands of dollars in cash in your on your person.
Yes.
That's full circle from Pizza
moment, yes.
to going to Pakistan reporting as a journalist during 9/11, right?
Yeah.
So there's you've had a bit of a life, but have come to be a personal finance expert. Always Save Money is the alwayssavemoney.com.ca.
Yeah, both works.
Both work, right?
Mm-hmm.
RubinaAhmed-Haq.com, right? And Always Save Money on Twitter and Instagram.
Yes, that's right.
And then the Dear Ruby podcast. We got Dear Ruby on it. Just look for Dear Ruby on Insta, Dear Ruby podcast on Twitter. And so we did some episodes a while ago. Actually, this is all my fault. We did a couple episodes a while back, and I of course did my 100 episodes, and then we stopped because I didn't have any time. Right? I'm going to take full responsibility.
I think it was. And also, you had a baby and I bought a house. So it's two big, huge life events, and so we kind of got sidetracked for a little while. But then we came back to Dear Ruby. Because of COVID-19, because we thought, you brought up the excellent idea. We should be talking about what's been happening. And we've been on it from day one, talking about all the benefits that are available, all the ways that people's personal finances are being affected. And we're getting good questions in about CERB, about tax situation, all different concerns that Canadians have about their money right now.
Yeah, so if you're looking for another podcast featuring myself, but mostly Rubina, you can actually record a question on the website. So it's dearruby.com, DEARRUBI.com. So check that out. That's and listen to episode 68 if you want to know more about Rubina. We're going to talk about Rubina's COVID-19 experience so far. So. Let's go back then. Of course, one of the things is we started a podcast probably that next weekend. But so where you had to take the kids out of school. What tell me what the first thing was that kind of made you realize this is a big deal.
Whoa, I had to get that cough out of the way before I started my long story. Excuse me.
Live
so
show,
I think
everybody.
it was March 15th was when we realized that schools were going to be closed at least until the end of March. And I had already kind of started realizing that we were heading into a situation where we were going to be under some kind of lockdown or that schools would be closed. I have a friend who lives in Italy, and obviously Italy was weeks ahead of us when it came to their country shutting down. And I spoke to him briefly. And he basically kind of alerted me to the fact that he goes, don't be fooled because it happens very, very quickly. Like one day you're going to work and then the next day everything is shut down. It really does happen that quickly. And started giving me sort of, he goes, you guys are just starting to get cases. You guys are just starting to realize how serious this is and how it now is in North America. He goes, you are going to see schools shut down. You are going to see businesses shuttered because COVID-19 is a real risk and they don't want it to spread. And the only way to do that is by getting people to stay home. And that kind of got me, in the headspace of I got to get ready for this. And so I started, on my WhatsApp chats with my girlfriends and a couple I had with my family, started saying, I'm getting some real anxiety over this. I think and a lot of people were like, oh, you're just exaggerating. And this was just like 1 week before everything happened. And I remember a week after, people were like, you were right. You knew.
Yeah.
You knew it was coming. So I'm not trying to say I'm some sort of future teller. I just basically spoke to a friend. But
it's something you don't want to be super right about either, right? It's like, I wish I wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wish I was wrong, of course. But I did all the basic things, I didn't do as much hoarding. I didn't go and buy like 80 rolls of toilet paper or 80 reams of it. But I definitely went and stocked up on more groceries than normal because my whole thing was, why should we leave the house if we don't have to? So we did go and stock up on basic like rice and pasta, stuff that's easy to keep for a long, long time, and stocked our freezer. What else could we do? And just kind of got ready. And I had to set up my husband's home office for him. Well, we had to set it up. I shouldn't say I'm the only one, but we had to quickly kind of find out a space for him to work, which was in my office. So we had to rearrange my stuff. So there was things that happened pretty quickly, just as my friend had alerted me to, because we knew we were headed into a long-term situation with COVID-19.
Because you're like, in terms of you don't go into an office, but you go a lot of places like studios and just other locations, all right? Maybe even to meet people, etc. It's not like you can work exclusively from home, or that you did. I mean, you are now though.
Mm-hmm. Well, I go once a week to the CBC before all this started, for sure, to record my record my column. It's a radio column, so I record the scripted part of it, and then I add in the clips. And the clips that I usually get are from experts in that field, whatever I'm talking about that week. For example, this week for my column on CBC, I'm talking about masks at work and whether companies can legally make you wear a mask at work. The short answer is yes. Short answer is yes. But people are still spoiler alert. But people are still confused about it, so it's definitely worth covering. So normally, like a story like that, I would go and meet the person who's going to talk to me about that and ask them, why that is. And I may go, a big part of my column that I do for CBC is streeters. So I go out on the street and I ask people what their opinion is on whatever story it is that I'm covering. And I often get really great answers and haven't been able to do that. I've really had to rely on just expert voices, which often feel like talking heads. I do have a couple of like Facebook pages that I'm on where I can put out a call and say, hey, anyone feeling like this, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can DM me and we can get connected. But it's not the same. I really like being on the street and talking to people. And that's been a big part of, what's been taken away because of COVID-19. And you're right. Like when I do stuff for Global, I go into the TV studio, often even for radio, I'll go in for that. It's just better quality. You get to see the people face to face. Definitely if I do any speaking engagement, I go in and do it in person. I've been doing speaking engagements from my home office, which is strange but fun. But normally, I'd be in front of an audience or I'd be with a panel. And so it's been a big adjustment for me anyways.
Yeah, I think the last event, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, were we at the same last public event together?
Yeah, end of February. Yeah, for a book launch. Yeah, we were there together. I think that was the last time I did anything kind of professionally.
A lot of us, yeah.
Yeah. After that, I don't even think socially I went out after that.
Well, because, like when we look at photos from that event, it's like, wait, that was before. We have to tell everyone. That was before. We didn't just do that.
But COVID-19 was a conversation. I mean, we were talking about it because we went away in February to Dominican Republic for a holiday, family holiday. And we were already concerned, like, what happens if when we're there, things start to get really bad and they bring us back or we get stuck there. So it was definitely February. We were already talking about COVID-19. So it wasn't like something that came out of nowhere. It's definitely a conversation that was happening for months before the country actually shut down or the province shut down.
And so have your finances been affected at all, or are you just having to adapt the way that you were doing things? Like, have you lost some business or potential business?
So I'm on the positive end of what's been happening. So my income has not been affected, and neither has my husband's. And we own a few investment properties. So what we have done is we've actually deferred those mortgages because we were worried about the renters' ability to pay.
Yeah.
So by deferring those mortgages, we've actually increased our cash flow situation quite significantly because obviously now all the money that we're collecting from rent just goes straight into our bank accounts. And so we've been able to do some other things with that money. Obviously, in preparation for the fact that renters may not be able to pay, but that's definitely helped us. Yeah.
So you were ready for your renters to not be able to pay, but they said, "Yeah, we're going to pay. We're good."
Yeah. So what that does really is because banks allowing you to defer mortgages, and they're not asking many questions. They're just saying if you want to defer, you can, because they're going to take interest from us, obviously.
Sure.
But that gives some flexibility of what you can do with that money. And so that's actually helped. And obviously we're both working from home and we're saving a lot of money on commuting, and we're not going out as much. Although because now they're allowing 10 people to meet, we've noticed we are kind of hosting here and there a little bit more. I have to admit though, it's been very simple the way that we've had people over. We're trying not to have too much touchy food, and we're using as little cutlery as possible, like things that we're just keeping in mind, and that actually is keeping costs down, because then you think, okay, like I got to think of something that's really easy to access. People aren't going to be constantly putting their hands into it, like a bowl of chips or something. And so it's just, it's helped me focus, and it's also helped us save money because you can't buy as many things because it's just too risky, right?
That's good to think about, right? Because, I'm having, my parents were telling me about, hey, come on, when you come to the pool, right? Outside is safe, right?
Right.
And then my mom was saying, oh, and we can make food, and you can sit at that table over there and inside, and because we're far away from each other. And I'm just like, that all sounds terrible. I don't want to go inside the house if I don't have to.
Well, you can bubble with them now. You can bubble with 10 people now. So why don't you bubble with them?
Well, we already have 10 people. And my brother's family has 5 people. Mm-hmm. And they're bubbled with them, and they're bubbled with other people. So there's no room for any more bubbling. Because it has to be the same people bubbling with the same people, right?
Right.
In Kayla's family, there's already 10 people there, and if we had my parents in, then we couldn't have my brother's family, and my brother's family has my parents because they just saw each other, and so there's probably a lot of people are getting confused about the bubbles. That's what I'm thinking, right? And there's bubbles overlapping with other bubbles, and I feel like a lot of people are actually just going back to normal. They took this. Bubble thing as, or we're in phase 2, so we can just go back to the way that it was, and that's not true. It's never going to be true.
Well, the virus is still here, and even though I've been meeting with, we've been our bubble is our family, but I've still been having friends over. I do some things like I'll disinfect my downstairs bathroom and then we don't use it. That's just exclusively for them. We spend all our time outside except for when they need to use the bathroom. When they leave, they disinfect
That's
it.
cool.
So we've got some system in place. And I think that everybody is different. Some people might think that I'm taking too much risk. Oh, they're still sitting in your patio chairs and they're still touching stuff outside. I mean, I understand like everyone's risk tolerance is different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But that's how we're surviving. And I think that's really what it's about right now is survival and making sure that you're keeping your family safe and they're not taking unnecessary risks. I definitely would not recommend that you have probably heard that there was a nightclub downtown that had 150 people that was charged. I think they were charged $2 million. I think that was the fine.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
When did that?
Ridiculous.
I didn't hear that. When did that happen?
It's a
Recently?
Goldie nightclub downtown.
Okay.
Supposedly they had a party where they let people come in through the back door, 150 people, and they got shut down, obviously.
Oh.
I don't know how they thought they'd get away with that. So I think I heard it very briefly. It was like $2 million they were charged, as they should be, because that is how the virus is going to spread. People having 10 people in the backyard, socially distanced, even if you go see your mom and dad and you give them a hug, that is not going to be the reason the virus spreads.
It's not a huge risk. You're right.
Exactly. The reason the virus spreads is when you get 150 people that come from 150 different homes and then go back to their home. That is how it's going to get worse, right?
That's it. That's it right there, right? And only one person. It's like one person crawled over the border, illegally somehow, right? Like these things happen, right?
We were the border.
Somebody's going to be able to, you know what I mean? Like people can sneak through things, and they can be in people's cars, be in trunks. That happens all the time, I'm sure, right? So we can't be like, oh, it's only in the States and it'll never get over here because our borders are locked. And people are going over there and coming back. So this stuff happens all the time. So yeah, like I guess we just have to be a little careful. Tell me a little bit about your experience with the school with your kids. So how old are your kids?
So my kids are both in full-time school. My son is in JK and my daughter is in grade 2. So both of them obviously since March 15th have been home since March break. And I was, again, going back to that conversation with my friend in Italy, was pretty much convinced that we were not going back. So I did all the things that I needed to do to set my daughter up because she's the one I was more concerned about. Bought her a Chromebook and a desk where she can work from, like things that she just needs. And for my son, I got to tell you, I just didn't do anything. Like they sent stuff out, a couple of things I sort of paid attention to, but I mean, we've been trying to teach him life skills. And so often he'll say to me, Mama, is this a life skill? And we're like folding laundry. I'm like, it is a life skill. But sometimes he's doing something mundane,
awesome.
like, I'm trying to think of something where he was like, is this a life skill? I'm like, no, that's just, you just like,
that's just stuff.
He's like walking on the sidewalk. Is this a life skill? I'm like,
am I learning?
You're just walking. Like, fine. It's not really
I mean, that makes sense. What you're saying is that it's not as much of a concern to have formal education for someone in JK because that's kind of what they're doing anyway. It's just learning life skills. I mean, the first years of school are kind of just advanced babysitting anyway, advanced daycare. It's like daycare, isn't it?
Okay, so I would say no. I think that I think that in JK and SK they do learn, and they're not just there to care for your kids while you're at work. They're actually teaching them life skills.
Well, the daycare workers, I feel, are teaching them skills too. That's why I'm sort of comparing it to like a more advanced version of that. Because I feel like Henry learns a lot when he's more so than here.
Yeah, I mean, in daycare, I never sent my kids to daycare, so I'm just sort of guessing as to what they do based on other people's experience. That, they teach them things like how to go to the washroom and how to eat and how to follow the rules.
Collaboration and interaction.
Whereas kindergarten actually gets into like how to spell certain words, how to
so it really
write.
does, eh?
Yeah, how to. My daughter was reading after SK, like how to read short sentences. Yeah.
I like that. That's great.
Yeah, and they do like concerts, which they have to prepare for, which is a little bit more complicated than I guess. I do think they push them along. The good thing about kindergarten is if the class is larger than 15, which they normally are, there's always two teachers in there. So there's a teacher and there's also an ECE. And then if there's any special needs class, kids, if the budget allows, because I know a lot of governments have cut budgets, but there's often a special teacher for that person too. So there's a lot of adults in the room to help those young people in those formative years.
So have you and Ron been able to continue your work with the kids at home, and like what's going on there? How does that work?
So Ron works at a bank, and his job is pretty full on Monday to Friday, and so the times that I really hate working on the weekend. I've like, that's one of the things that I worked 15 years of weekends, and when I stopped, I said I just never want to work on the weekend unless I have to. I mean, I'll do like a little here and there stuff, but to actually do work on the weekend, like 8 hours, is too much for me. It's something I just don't want to do anymore. I shouldn't say too much for me. It's just something I don't want to do anymore. Yeah. But that's the only, I've had to revert back to that. I mean, now Sundays is the day that I get most of my work done.
It's Sunday morning right now.
It's Sunday morning right now. So after I get off of this, I'm going to have breakfast, and I'm probably just going to come back to my home office and get everything ready for the week. And, I really have to work around his schedule. It's, and I think this is a case for women everywhere, like really the child rearing is on my head. I shouldn't say on my head. That's kind of a mean way to say it, but it's my responsibility. Yeah. And then the labor of the home is increased because we're all home all the time. So the cleaning and the laundry and the cooking and just the requirements. Whereas before, Ron would go to work, I would drop the kids at school, and then I'd have that 6 hours where I could do whatever I needed to do. And that included work, but it also included grocery shopping. It also included some me time. It also included me booking, something in that just for myself. Sometimes I like to just go to Value Village and walk around and look at stuff. That's just my way of like sort of decompressing. And I'm not doing any of that. So the way we're surviving is by just doing it day by day. And I haven't had to give up work, but I definitely feel like sometimes I'm struggling to produce the same quality, I got to say.
Yeah. And then this is a really important, I don't know, as a parent, I feel like it's the most important conversation to have. We're just now getting back into daycare on Monday. Mm-hmm. And it just happens to coincide with Kayla going back to medical school. Mm-hmm. But she was doing medical school from home during these last couple of months. Mm-hmm. And again, my job is on video with clients all day. Mm-hmm. So I can't have a baby there. Daycare has enabled all of us to be able to do intensive work, or work that involves not being able to hold the baby while you're doing it, or being able to schedule around the baby's naps. If there are multiple naps, which we only have one now. Do your kids nap?
No.
Right?
They go to bed early, but they don't nap. Like even now, we're trying now to put them to bed by 8:30. My son especially, because he's still pretty little. He's 4 years old. My daughter, 10 o'clock sometimes. But they do sleep in. They are kind of at that age where they'll sleep in a little bit. Okay. But yeah, no naps anymore.
It's just crazy how it affects. It just affects so many people. And I have daycare, but now you don't. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, why is that? Like you should have the same ability to send your kids somewhere as I do, but mm-hmm. the summer you would have had them to yourself anyway, right?
Well, right before the pandemic started, I had actually hired a part-time nanny to come 2 days a week.
Of course. Okay. Yeah.
So I'd spoken to her, and we were on the same page. I could afford it, and because my work was picking up, and I wanted to just have 2 days to myself where I could stay at work till 5 o'clock, because I was always rushed to come home by 2:45. And now I'm thinking, wow, I had so much time back then. What was I doing? But this is the thing, right? Like next time we have summer vacation, like parents will often have these sort of kind of like, thank goodness they're back in school when it comes to September. I'm like, 2 months is nothing. I can totally manage 2 months of finding things for them to be entertained with. But since we've been home now already 3-4 months almost. So that fell through because it just became too complicated, because it was part-time. So she'd be going to other homes, and she didn't want to do that as well. Obviously she didn't want to go to 2 different places. So she found a full-time job. I'm actually, now that we're talking, going to get in touch with her, because the thinking was that once daycare opens, that the family that she's with is going to send their kids back to daycare. And but that family might say, I don't want to send my kids to daycare. I'd rather just keep this situation because it's safer. I probably would do that. So I'll have to see where she's at. And then, I don't know whether I need it right now. I think we're okay because Ron is home and we're kind of
You've gotten
making it
used to it
happen.
now.
Yeah, like I
Yeah,
don't know whether why take on that extra expense now. Honestly, I'm thinking now I probably will never need childcare options because once the kids are back in school, Salma's 8. She's in a couple of years she'll be able to stay home by herself even. But
so you've adjusted your life to
I've
accommodate
adjusted my
this.
life, yeah. And
Yeah,
my older one is really good at like finding things to do on her own. I don't have to like if I'm like I need 2 hours, she'll find something to do for 2 hours. It's my younger one, but he's getting older
he's
too, so
getting
he'll
there.
be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's kids who I guess people who have kids who are younger
Hmm.
or babies. These are things that you need childcare for, or not work. And as you said already, the burden does fall predominantly to the mothers.
Hmm.
I mean, if you even have anybody else to help you in the first place,
Hmm.
single mothers, of course, are a thing. Single fathers are a thing too, but not as much.
Hmm.
Also, stay-at-home dads, as I was for a bit,
Hmm.
are not as much. It exists, but it's not as much. So, I mean, the concept that this is disproportionately affecting women is completely true and something that needs to be acknowledged. And the people who are making the rules, like, oh, okay, let's do school. I mean, you've heard about this so far. Let's do school 2 days on, 3 days off, or 1 week on, 1 week off. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
I mean, I can understand people being really frustrated hearing that, but my reaction is that we got to do what we got to do to get through this. But it is going to be very difficult for
Yes.
working women to actually
Mm-hmm.
manage that. The good thing about COVID-19 is that everybody is fully aware of the challenges that exist because of COVID-19. So, say school goes back 1 week on, 1 week off. Let's just say, use that as an example. I would be able to completely um, make my case that there are days where I just am not going to be available. And I think my husband could do the same way so that he could relieve me on the days that I do need to do something when they are
Yeah.
home. So that's the only big bonus of COVID-19 is that everybody knows that we're all in a tough situation. It's not like you have to individually explain, listen, my husband lost his job and this is happening.
Yeah.
Like
That's
it's not
harder.
like
Yeah.
exactly that's harder. This is a much more easier situation. So I hear the parents saying, well, how's that going to work? And that's going to be confusing. But what else can we do? We have to do something to keep people safe, right? So my
Yeah.
reaction is like it sucks, but what else can we do? We've been home with our kids for 4 months. So this is a better solution. At least they're in class and at least you have a week to yourself to finish your work. And it should be assumed that your employer is going to understand your situation. I cannot imagine an employer still, not understanding how tough this is, COVID-19, and giving you a hard time for not being available during certain days.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so this is one of the things that we have to worry about, and it is one of the big things because the whole society is built around this infrastructure. You got kids, and you're going to be able to put them somewhere, right,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if we didn't have that ability, then society would be structured differently, right?
Yeah,
It would be
maybe
like,
we can structure differently once we get out of this. A lot of people already talking about liking the fact of working from home and liking the idea of, having access to their family at any time of the day and not having to commute. I mean, I think we're just going to be fundamentally changed after all of this ends.
I think so too, and the concepts like one spouse works a couple of days a week, the other one works the other days of the week, if that's possible. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just the whole structure of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and weekends off for everybody. It just we do need more flexibility, as you said. That's the key for all of this: flexibility for ourselves, flexibility for others.
Hmm.
It's yeah, and then all of this. The world is a mess right now, isn't it?
Hmm. Hmm.
But you're doing relatively okay. It seems like you've sort of adapted to this.
Yeah, I mean, financially, we were ready because, as being a personal finance journalist, I was well aware of that I need to have an emergency fund, not just for a pandemic, which I never would have expected, but even for my own economic problems. Maybe I can't work for a year. I mean, I took time off when Zane was born, so obviously there was a time period where I wasn't making very much money. Summers are always slower for me, so during the boom times, as I call them, like November, December, January, February, I tend to make more money because there's Christmas stories that come out always about spending, overspending. Then there's always the RRSP deadline. Then there's always the tax deadline. So I always seem to be very busy during the winter and early spring. And so I always bank money at that time so that I can, because summer is pretty slow. There's not much to talk about with personal finance when it comes to summer, except for this year. This year, there's tons to talk about. So freelancers are actually doing really well. I mean, I've had a lot of new contracts come.
People reaching out to you?
Asking if I'd be available because... And
there's always something new coming out every week or so to talk about even, right? Are you finding yourself having to find things to talk about, or do they just pop up in the news and you're like, yep, that's the thing for the week?
100%. There has been very little searching. I mean, everything has just kind of happened, and there's obviously topics that just have to be covered. Whereas sometimes during, I call it silly summer, I'll be like, oh, what should we talk about? So I'll call some sources and be like, what are your clients saying? Like, I might call you and say, oh, what are your clients saying? Like, what's really bothering Canadians right now? And then try to build a story. Whereas now it's like, oh, that's the story. The CERB's been extended. That's the story. The border is closed till mid-July. That's the story. I mean, it's really easy to talk about something in personal finance for sure.
And I before we go, I wanted to ask you briefly about the journalism industry in general. If you're seeing, like, how has it been affected by this? Is everything just sort of moving online? Is there going to be a time when you're going back into a studio or interviewing people in person?
So here's the thing. As a freelancer, I've worked from home 80% of the time as it is. And I assumed, I know that everybody is working from home mostly. Some people are still going in, like if they anchor the news. But mostly, producers and writers are doing all their work from home. But I assumed that all of that would revert back to normal. But I met a friend, saw a friend the other day, and she's the producer for one of the radio stations that I work for. And she's like, no, they're actually thinking of keeping us at home. And I'm like, how is that going to work? Like live radio. She goes, it's all set up and we're doing it well. And they're thinking, what's the point of having that extra expense of having someone come in? I don't know. Like for me, journalism is about meeting people and getting to know them and understanding the people that you work with, understanding their point of views. And I don't know whether that comes across online. But I think that, there's a lot of jobs that people felt never could be worked from home are now being worked from home, right?
Yeah.
And that includes anchoring newscasts. That includes putting on shows from your bedroom. I mean, it's unbelievable with technology now what we're able to do.
Well, and that's the thing that's the bottleneck right now, though, is a bit of the technology. I'm surprised that they can do the live radio show well enough. They must have, high-speed internet and, because a studio is like high quality internet plus high quality cameras, and that's you can get that in your house, but it costs a lot of money to get it in your house, and so they've had to adapt a bunch. It's not exactly the same, but it seems like it's catching up fast, though.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't cost so much. I mean, even if the company was to pick up the cost of that, that's still cheaper than them having an office for you, right? So
yeah, good point.
If they can,
but that means shutting down the office, though, right?
Yeah,
that means taking that step.
Exactly, and then in most cases it's a lease, so not renewing the lease, and so then those landowners or real estate owners will have to find different ways to use that space, and that could be converting it into residential. Who knows, right? Down the road, I am pretty convinced that in 10 years or so, many of those very tall office towers are going to be residential buildings because people are going to realize that they can do a lot of work from home. People are going to enjoy the fact that they can work from home. And I'm already hearing anecdotally of people who lived in Toronto who are now thinking of just moving back to the city that they are from, like their home city.
Yeah.
And because they can still do their job in Toronto. They don't need to be in Toronto to do it. And, for young people, especially who have been struggling to get into the housing market and wondering how they're going to buy their first home, now they have the option. They can move to another town, which is amazing, and it's got walkability, and it's got all the things that they need, but their job might be in the big city core, but they only got to go in once a week. So it's okay. I can move 2 hours away because I don't mind that commute once a week, but every day to do that commute is soul destroying, right? I mean, commute is one of the reasons people get stressed out.
That's it. That's why they stop, right? And then you go get time with your family and all of the extra things that go along with that, all the consequences. So everything's so changing so much. So if you enjoyed this conversation with Rubina and I, well, you can hear this every week on the Dear Ruby podcast.
You can, yeah.
It's where we do talk about all of the things that, Rubina basically figures out all the things that are going on in the week, and then we talk about those things because you're talking about them all over the place, right? And writing about them. And so, just go to dearruby.com, dearrubi.com, and go back to, I don't know, maybe episode 3. I don't know. You can start with 1 of the COVID-19 series if you want, but this show and the Dear Ruby show every week during COVID are meant to be listened to on the day, if not the week that they're published, because they're about topical things, right? Like our experience, what's going on with our lives with COVID, what's going on with the country, with benefits, with everything. So, it's something you could listen to 5 years from now, I'm sure, just if you're curious about what was going on, but it's more valuable for now as opposed to, my first 100 shows, which are about someone's personal finance story. Again, episode 68, I'll put the link to that for Rubina's backstory. But for today, thanks for coming on the show, Rubina.
Thanks so much for having me. It was so much fun.
And I'll see you next week on the Dear Ruby podcast.
Yep.
And next week, it's still in the works, but I'm expecting some of my podcaster friends to be on, so that'll be nice. We'll do a bit of a crossover, kind of like today, but I'm not on that podcast, so it's a little bit different. Until then, I'll see you next week.